Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, all right. All right, good? All right. Hey everybody, as you notice, I'm not Padre. He is actually gone today. As many of you may know, you mentioned through an email that went out to the church last week, but there was a final decision made by the South Carolina Supreme Court concerning our property. Many of you know it's been in litigation for, 8 or 9 years, and it was finally decided this past week. The great news really is that as far as our property concerning the historic campus and here and everywhere else, we are safe. It's going to be in our name forever, praise God. So there's nothing for us to worry about with that. It frees up a lot of money for us, just a lot of energy that was being wasted in the past will now be to go forward. Unfortunately, there was a number of churches in our diocese that at least right now, it looks like they were ruled against, which means they could possibly lose their property. So today, the bishop is gathering with many of those clergy, really all the clergy of the diocese whose properties were affected, and bringing them together. And Padre is there today to be with those other members of the clergy. So please keep them in your prayers. We'll be giving more information out when it's needed. But anyway, I'm here today, and normally we usually have somebody here that meets with us, or I have somebody, we go back and forth, but I want to do something a little different today, and I just want to kind of share some things in my heart. And I know many times I've mentioned it before in sermons, and people who come up to meet me during the week or over the last maybe year have come up to my office. I've filmed this. I want to kind of talk about just my journey, because people who walk in my office, sometimes they said it looks like they feel like they're in Cracker Barrel. It's stuff all over the place, as you can see. Signs people have made for me, swords, certificates, pictures, paintings, sayings, stuff that has been given to me or I've collected over the years that kind of just represents part of who I am, what people think of me. And so it's been really just not a day that I go by where I don't look up at these things, and it brings back memories, or it sets my mind straight. Many times these things balance me because it communicates, at least in part, things of what I believe. And I want to talk about some of these things this afternoon. I'm just walking through some of these because I think some of you have asked about them before, and hopefully I can give some clarity about this, and it can at least share who I am. And so this should be fun. I'm actually kind of excited about doing this, and so I hope it blesses you, those that are watching. So let's just begin. So if you walk in my office, one of the first things you'll notice up here is these pictures of these little signs. Obviously, you've seen these things around Bluffton. It's kind of very popular in the Low Country. But maybe 9 years ago, almost 10 years ago, one of the women in Lisa's, my wife's Bible study, Thursday morning, she meets with a lot of mothers who have this group that meets on Thursday mornings over the historic campus. And Paula was her name, and she made these. And she actually made this for me because she's heard me talk about these places so often in some of my sermons. Obviously, Canterbury, where you could say, in some sense, historically speaking, Anglicanism began really 500 years ago over in England. I've actually never even been there, but I've read enough about it that I feel like I have. And you see Boone there is where I went to college. It's a place that's very near and dear to my heart. I've often said when Jesus comes back, he's coming through Boone first. I believe that too. It's such a beautiful place, and it's where I came to Christ. It's where some of the most formative years of my life, it's where I ran cross country. And you'll see down there the fictional city, Rivendell, that Tolkien wrote about in his trilogy, The Lord of the Rings. It's really the heavenly city where I often, in my heart, often has wanted to go. And sometimes, if there's ever a place I could go to vacation, that would be it. Melbourne, Florida. This is not Melbourne, Australia. This is Melbourne, Florida, the first job I took out of seminary. Some wonderful years there I spent with some wonderful people right on the coast down there in Central Florida. And I left there. They helped me go plant a church up in South Carolina. Wow, nearly, I guess it was 17 years ago. So it's amazing since that time. You'll see down below there, Pawleys Island was the place that I had my first job out of college. It was where I was a youth minister for nearly 5 years. It was the church that sent me to seminary. It was the church that I got married in. And I have many, many, many close friends that I'm still very close to that still live there. And then obviously Narnia, that's not a surprise. Many of you know I've talked about this over the years with the fictional city that really is almost a snapshot of heaven that C.S. Lewis wrote about in his series, The Chronicles of Narnia. So it seemed right to have that in there. You see that shield up there, it was given to me a few years ago. I love Celtic crosses, and obviously shield is a major symbol in the Bible. We know that Paul talks about taking up the shield of faith, so it seems right that I could have that. If you move on, you look up, you'll see this at the very top. Besides my degrees there, you'll notice there's a Latin phrase up here. I have up there, Soli Deo Gloria, which literally translated means alone, God glory, or as we say it, to the glory of God alone. It's a theme that's been throughout my life that I've tried to live, a creed really, you could say, almost every day, to try to live my life in such a way where it is completely spent on trying to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. And obviously this is a major thing I've talked about with one of my heroes. I'll talk about in a little bit, Johann Bach. You notice in almost every one of his pieces of music, at the very bottom of his music, he either wrote the Latin letters SDG, or spelled it out, Soli Deo Gloria. But he wrote that every piece of music he ever wrote, he believed that he was doing this for the glory of God. And so in many ways, I have tried to continue that in my own life. There's not, honestly, I don't think there's been a day that goes by where I don't look up and think of him and think of that. And I look forward to meeting him one day to talk about these things with him. What a witness he's been to me. Directly above that, there, the Soli Deo Glorias, I have some paintings from Vincent van Gogh. He is probably my favorite painter. What an artist he was and at the time. And that one there in the middle you see there is the parable of the sower, the biblical picture that he wanted to paint of the man who goes and lays seeds in the field, that some grows up on rocky soil and some grows up and grows tenfold. And he painted that to communicate that biblical passage, and it's such a beautiful picture, isn't it? And then over there to the left of that is the Church of Alviers that he lived near and close to, and he painted that picture of that church, which is, I think the colors are just so stunning. And again, I love looking at those nearly every day. And with that Soli Deo Gloria below it, there is a painting that a picture that has struck me over the years that I've often put in my sermons or I've communicated with. It's from this painter here that I actually communicated just recently. I've been looking for it for years and could not find it anywhere. And finally, I actually talked to the original man who painted this. He's a Christian, very strong believer who created these works, and he painted this a number of years ago, but there was no more copies of it. And I love the picture because it communicates here. I think it actually says in the scripture out of Revelation 19, blessed are those who are invited to the wedding feast of the Lamb. And what's communicating there is that one day we will be invited in to feast with the Lord and all those who've gone before us, all of God's people. And it's obviously communicating that this man that cannot believe he's being invited in, and that's completely because of Christ. And I love how he has both his arms there to say, I'm not letting you go, I got you. And even if you look closer in there, you can see the people there inside this great banquet hall, this great wedding feast, you could almost say. And I think there's not a time that I didn't go by, a day didn't go by, I look at that in some way and think of, I long to be reunited with those that I miss dearly, those that I know who've gone before me, who love Christ. And so I could not find the picture, the painting of it, and I actually contacted the painter, and he actually had one of these back in his studio that he had forgotten about for years, and he actually sent it to me. So one of his signed copies, so I greatly treasure this. If you move on to my office, you'll notice up here I have a bunch of stuff all over the place. A lot of things here, but I've talked about it before. These are just people who've inspired me over the years. That's actually the angel Gabriel, who is a major figure, obviously, in the Gospels. Actually, his name is mentioned. And I have right there in the middle, Kobe Bryant, and there too, on the left is Alexander Hamilton. I love both these people because I love the stories of redemption. Both people who managed to screw up their lives and yet through, I would say, you could say almost the grace of God, began to put their lives back together and make their lives count for something. Both of them died way too young. Both of them had a tremendous impact. Both of them would admit it, look back on their past and realize they made huge mistakes, but in the end, I could say they fixed their lives with God's help. And so I had them up there and think of them often. If you notice there's a little baseball here to right there below Kobe. And there's really a story behind that, I'm a huge baseball fan, was for years. I did fall away years ago after the strike that happened way back in the 90s. I've kind of come back with the return of the Red Sox. But I've always been a huge fan of Jackie Robinson. He was a believer. He's obviously the one who changed history, the first black player to come into the major leagues. And so years ago, I was sharing this with a friend of mine, just how much I loved this man. And I've listened to a couple of biographies on him and just found his life so amazing. And he went over to his cabinet and he pulled out a baseball with Jackie Robinson's signature on it. And he began to share with me about when he was 8 or 9 or 10 years old, he went to see him play in the Negro Leagues and got his autograph. And anyway, I thought it was amazing that I could touch the ball. And so shortly before he died, he wanted me to come over and he actually gave me the baseball. And he said, I know you'll always treasure it. I know you'll never sell it. I know you will, you appreciate who he was. And that's why I want you to have it. And so it's been overwhelming sorry, I hit my mic. It's been overwhelming to think about that he thought about me even years later to give me that. So that's something I'm always going to treasure. Over the left, there's a flag there that was given to me from the family of Brad Donaldson. He died about, 5 or 6 years ago. He was a member of our church. Many of you know his wife and his family. He served over in Afghanistan, actually won a medal when he was over there. He died, one of the great shocks of my life, dropped dead at 50 with a heart attack, and he was in just supreme shape. So it was something that was beyond, it was something genetic, we believe now. Anyway, after he died, his family gave me that flag and gave me his patch he was actually wearing that day. Was his little patch with his name on it. So I look up there and think of him often and look forward to seeing him again. If you looked up higher, you'll notice up there, one of the people I also love, I said I love great redemption stories. So you have Hamilton there, you have Kobe Bryant, and above you have Johnny Cash, who I've talked so often about. Just a great story, again, of redemption, of falling hard, and through the grace of God, him putting his life back together again and having an incredible ministry to people in prison, to people who've fallen on hard times through either drugs or alcohol or, just the trials and the tribulations and just the brokenness of life. And so that is a picture right below there that Tim Edwards gave me. It's a signed picture by Johnny Cash. So I have all this signed memorabilia that I love dearly. And then in the middle there is a prayer that actually belonged to my father. They gave him when he was ordained, and I've kept it and it sits in my office. Again, if I were to move over, I want to show, there's a picture there you'll see of an eagle with the flag on it, and right next to it is a picture. It was the year to the day that Grace Sulak died. And I came out and basically shared some words from the scriptures. This was actually on a very, very, very early on a Sunday morning. before church even began. And I came and shared, and I still have that picture up there, but above it is something I want to show you. I think this is kind of funny and yet fitting. This was given to me by their family, that little sign where it says, "You were given this life because you were strong enough to live it." And what is so great about this is they've watched me up close and seen the struggles that I deal with in my life. And as a pastor, things are very, very hard. There are a lot of weeks. There's just a lot of sadness. Sometimes the job is so overwhelming. And they gave me this to tell me that I could handle it, and I would add here with God's help. But what's so funny about it is you notice down there, you may not even notice, it says, "Because you are strong enough." The enough is spelled wrongly. It's the N is missing in there. And of course, I missed it for a couple of years. And somebody else noticed it and pointed it out to me. And when I pointed it out to the Sulak family, they immediately wanted to fix it. And I said, "No, you've got to leave this. This is so me." For one thing, I'm dyslexic, so I miss these things all the time. I didn't even notice the fact it sat on my wall for years, and I didn't notice it. Just makes it, that's me. Sorry, I keep hitting my mic. That's just me. So rarely did anybody actually notice it in there, but I think it's great. Above it, this is the picture there of Grace. She was an amazing, amazing young woman. You often hear that people, I think sometimes you say this about people, and we make them sometimes better in death than they are in life, but she was the real deal. She was just an extraordinary young woman who I look forward to seeing again one day. And she's had an impact in my life, even at 14. And of course, I have to put my alma mater up there, Appalachian State, up there. There's a picture from Sports Illustrated when we went in and beat Michigan in their home stadium, what many people have called one of the greatest upsets in sports history. It was on my birthday, September 1st, that I was given this gift, 2007. So all these years later, I still said it's one of the greatest birthday presents I could ever get. I don't know if anything will ever top it as far as a birthday present. One cool thing is this past Christmas, my daughter gave me this picture up here. And I want to explain it because when I first saw it, I didn't know what to make of it. It seemed almost kind of spooky at first when I saw it. But when she began to tell me the story of it, I was really immensely moved by it. And that is, it's a painting of a young man who is a Filipino young man. And I want to tell you the backstory of it because once I heard it, I just found it so powerful. That is my daughter, who is my oldest daughter, Rachel Scott, who is a first year at Anderson University over in the western part of the state. She goes in the library nearly every day, and inside the library there, she noticed this painting hanging up on the wall, and she was so struck by it, she just kept looking at it and looking at it and looking at it, and finally she went and asked the person, she said, "Where did you get this painting?" And they said, "Oh, it's quite a story behind it," and that is we used to have a young man that attended here that graduated from Anderson maybe about a decade earlier, and he was adopted from the Philippines. He was an orphan in the Philippines. He was living on the streets, starving to death, basically. He was only like 5 or 6 years of age, and this American family went over and adopted him and brought him into their home, and they were very, very strong Christians, and they not only shared their home with him and shared their food with him and shared their resources with him, but they also shared the Word of God with him. And he said maybe around the age of 8 or 9, he ended up becoming a believer. And he said, that was the real life they gave me. So you may not be able to notice it there in the painting, but there's water coming off of that Bible into his mouth. And so he said, I get emotional thinking about this. He said, they gave me life physically, the things I needed to survive, but they also gave me something to survive spiritually. So they gave me the water of life that springs new life eternal in me. And so he painted this picture, and we actually had to get permission from him, and we were able to get it copied. And we have a copy in our home. We have one hanging in our bedroom, and now I have one here in my office. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful picture. If you walk also in my office, you'll notice in there, my desk, it's just full of pictures and sayings and scriptures, and you'll see the books up there. Some of them I've read, some of them are just for looks. To think I've read that much, it just takes me so long to read these things. Many people will notice the little bobbleheads I have up there of the ones that are really have always moved me. Obviously, I've talked about Bach so much. I think many of you know that. And you'll see there C.S. Lewis, Bonnie Len gave that to me. Over there, Martin Luther, the great reformer, who has been so informative of my faith. And then I have some of my favorites in there. I've got to have some Star Wars in there. So you have Chewbacca and my favorite character of all the Star Wars movie, Admiral Akbar, right there between Luther and Lewis. And then my family gave me that little tiny Bob Ross little, I don't even know what he is. He actually speaks. And what I think is kind of funny is my children one time, last year Netflix came out and started showing all the Bob Ross pictures. His old, I think he died something like 25 years ago. But they're showing his old episodes. And my children just thought it was just so ridiculous. They were showing this guy with this huge afro. And what was so funny is we started watching it, and just like everybody, they were pulled in and they were mesmerized by it. And we have a picture, I wish I had this today, where they're all sitting around watching him paint for the next 20 to 30 minutes. And so they gave me this for Christmas, and so it's still up there in my office. I also have above that some pictures of my family. I'll talk a little more about that in a second. One of them is significant over there to the left. It's a picture of my wife Lisa and a man named Douglas Gresham. Douglas Gresham is the adopted son of C.S. Lewis, the son of Joy Gresham, and maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, I had contacted Douglas. I had been trying to get a hold of him for almost 25 years, and finally, through a mutual friend, many of you know Padre Henry, the author, I was able to get in contact with him through her. And when he was up in the mountains in North Carolina, Lisa and I went up there for a week and stayed with him. And it was just one of the greatest thrills of my life, getting to talk with him and ask him questions about his father, the man that raised him, C.S. Lewis. And just to hear all the questions I've wanted to ask that were never in any of the biographies, that were never in any of the books, that I was able to just to ask him, and he was able to share with me. I often thought that is it's just a sign of what I think things are going to be like in the city of God. All the questions we have in this life that we can't get answered, that suddenly, when we're before the Lord, we'll be able to ask, and everything will be revealed. You know, we see through a glass darkly right now, but one day we will see fully, just as God now sees us fully. And so I have these pictures. Obviously, the most important thing in my life besides my relationship with God is my family. This sits on my desk. I love this little frame. Reminds me of the mountains. There's our children in there. You see Fielding right there in the front. That's totally Fielding right there, our 7-year-old. And just behind him to the left, his yellow shirt is Josiah. Of all our children, the most gentle, most sweet. Then many of you know Saraya or Katie over to the left. And very at the back is Will, who I call Willie, who is studying to be a pilot now, who is a second year in Charleston Southern, who's really flying planes now. So it's pretty extraordinary to watch him. And then my daughter, who I talked about earlier, she is 18 years old, but turning 19 this summer. She's first year at Anderson. I'm going to pick her up this next week. And then my son, Sam, in the very back next to Lisa. Just want to say a word about him because I know many of you have asked about him. He will be graduating in a couple of weeks from Virginia Tech. He's been there for 4 years. Many of you know he went on a Marine scholarship, and I know many of you have asked about that. It's been really exciting. He has been the #1 cadet there at Virginia Tech for nearly 4 years. And he was supposed to go off to Officer of Canada School last summer to become an officer in the United States Marine Corps, and he got a migraine, and they still have not completely figured out what's going on with that. They've been running tests. We're still trying to figure it out. But it's made things very, very difficult moving forward. So we still believe there's a way forward. They absolutely want to keep him. They believe he can be a great officer. So, but we've still got some things to work on. So we don't know if he's going to be going off this summer to Officer Candidate School. Right now he is, but we just don't know for sure yet. Maybe this winter. But please keep him in your prayers, Sam. He'll be home in a couple weeks, at least a little bit. And but thank you for all your prayers with him. And I'm just so immensely proud of him because what he's done is just incredible to get that scholarship. So we feel very, very blessed because of him. I also say my other kids, not necessarily the ones by blood, but these are all the ones that I took to Passion this past year. What a great, great, great time. I've said often, and I will say it again, it's impossible not to feel hopeful about the future when you spend time around young people. I really reject the notion that many people have said that I think a lot of people just link all young people into this millennial generation. They're really not. These are some of the most hardest working, extraordinary young people I've ever met. And I think our future is in great hands with them. So we took all of them to Passion this past year in Atlanta, saw their faith grow. Thank you as a church for being so supportive of that, and especially through the ministries of God's Goods that was able to support us financially to be able to go to this, because college young men and women don't have a lot of money, but because of our of the money we put aside to be able to take trips like this, they were able to go, and so I feel just immensely, immensely thankful for that. If you also look at my desk, I have many, many quotes of what I call my patron saint, Jonathan Edwards, who I consider one of the greatest preachers in American history, who has had a profound impact on me. And so I had these, when he was 21 years old, one of the very first sermons he ever preached, he talked at the very end of that sermon about resolutions that he wanted to take up for the rest of his life, ones that he would look to nearly every night as he went to bed. He would look at these resolutions and he would ask himself these questions, or he would state to himself, resolve that I will live my life like this. And he had a number of them. I can't put them all up here, but three I have on my desk are these three, that I will resolve to live with all my might while I do live. I will give every single thing I have right now while I'm alive, which is why I loved Kobe Bryant so much. He did that with his life and his call to, whether it was basketball or making movies or whatever, give every single thing I have while I can, and resolve that I will live as I wish I had done when I come to die, that we won't look back and have regrets, that we will look back and realize we did everything we possibly could with the gifts and the resources that God has given us, so that I can look back and say, I gave everything I had. And something I look at and think about nearly every day. And resolved, he says, to endeavor to obtain for myself as much happiness in the other world as I possibly can. And of course, that's in line with the scriptures that Jesus says, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where nothing in this world can get to it or touch it. So the idea is that what we're storing up in heaven, we get that by how we live our lives presently. So the idea is that we are living for God in such a way that we are honoring Him, and He is storing up for us treasures, happiness, even greater fulfillment in the next world. And so I have tried to teach that, preach that, but more importantly, I've tried to live that. And so Edwards is obviously one of my great, great heroes of the faith. One of the other ones I've talked about often is Elisabeth Elliot. This is, again, on my desk. She was the wife of the martyred missionary Jim Elliot. She died just maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Maybe 15 years ago, I actually wrote her a letter, and she responded to me. It was one of the great highlights of my life. And I don't know what happened, but somewhere in between moves, I lost the letter, and I've yet to be able to find it. But in the letter, she actually shared with me a famous quote that she often said, that it's actually attributed to Amy Carmichael, the great missionary, that she wrote, Elisabeth Elliot wrote a biography on, and that is that in acceptance, lieth peace. And Elizabeth Elliot knew this. She knew extraordinary suffering in this life. She had 2 husbands die on her. She had a lot of suffering. But she realized that in a lot of these cases that it was all a part of God's plan. And she said the more she began to fight it, she realized the more she was fighting against God's will. And she said that she discovered peace when she learned acceptance. That she just had to, in many cases, like I've said often, we just have to bend the knee to the Lord, even when we do not understand, even with things that do not make sense, and just hand it over to God and to accept what comes our way, knowing that He's going to work everything out, that He is one day going to make everything new. So in acceptance lieth peace. And so Elizabeth Elliot has had an extraordinary impact in my life. One of the other people that, gosh, I don't know if there's a week that doesn't go by that I don't share in one way or another his influence in my life, and that's Dr. Timothy Keller, who was the pastor of Redeemer Church and Church of the Redeemer in New York City for, nearly almost 30 years. He retired just a couple of years ago. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer about 2 years ago. He's still going. He's still fighting it. As he said, listen, we're all under death sentences. It just is a matter of when. There's so many lessons he taught me, but one of the ones I remember very clearly because I wrote it down, and he has since repeated it many times, and that is this idea about character. I had this on my desk, right there smack in the center, that he used to teach us that character is always, always, always the most supreme thing. Character is king. Your character and your integrity are the things that matter. And so he used to tell us, you cannot fake it. You can only have this charade for only so long. But, how you live in private will be found out in public. So I've taken that lesson, nearly 25 years later and tried to live this out. That's why I've often said, how I live in private, I don't feel like I have anything to hide. You can ask my wife, you can ask my children how I am. They will tell you more than enough of my flaws, but you've got to keep your character integrity. It is one of the central themes of the Bible. And so I've taken what I think Tim took right out of the Scriptures, and that is about people of high character. That is more important than anything. And why that's important is I remember he said this. He said he's watching this happen over and over and over again in churches, in businesses, in politics, anything, but especially churches, is that many churches, many of God's people put competence over character. In other words, they look at people and they go, can they do this job? Can they perform the finances well? Can they preach well? Can they do these things more than character? He said character is always king. Character is what will carry the day. It's what matters. And so I've tried to take what he said and to live it out to the best of my ability as a husband, as a father, as a pastor. Reminds me of another quote I have below that says, sometimes success can take you places that character cannot sustain you. I heard this a couple years ago, and it stuck with me that I just need to be very, very careful about what I consider and I think is a successful life, because which is why I'm very careful about what I do next and where God takes me. That I'm at peace of being, in some sense, a lowly assistant that no one knows about. I'm totally at peace about it, because I don't want to let anything that could bring me to higher places that maybe have more visibility, but may get in front of my character, where my character cannot sustain me. So I've been very, very deliberate about that. And it's another quote I heard too. I don't know who this is to, but 'tis better to be a noble prince than a hapless king. I like that, and which is why I put it on my desk. It's okay. I'm at peace about that. Also on my desk, as I have very often, I have quotes all over the place and paintings. This one is a picture of Aslan. I believe that's Lucy there in Aslan's arms. I love this picture, but it's a scripture of Isaiah 41 about not being afraid, that knowing that the Lord is with us, that we shouldn't be discouraged, that I am God, I am with you, I will make you strong, I will help you, I will watch over you. And I love this picture because it communicates beautifully how I view my relationship with the Lord, is that He always surrounds me. And He is so much bigger and so much greater than I am, and I just can sit there and just rest in Him. So I have that on my desk, look at that often, and it's been helpful many, many days. Also, on my desk is a picture I have of Billy Graham. He preached this one occasion. We should ask ourselves 3 questions before we speak. Is it true? Is it kind? Does it glorify God? Does it glorify Christ? So before we say or speak or act on anything, to remind ourselves and ask these 3 questions, okay? Is it true? Okay? Is it kind? So this is the thing. It may be true, it may be kind, but does it glorify Christ? And ask ourselves, this has saved me. I cannot tell you how many times I have it on my desk, or I'm on the phone with somebody, and I'm very, very frustrated, or I want to say something, and I look at this, and I say, I need to be quiet. Helpful. Another saying I have up there is from Tolkien's books, Bilbo, who says to Gandalf, I feel thin, sort of stretched like butter scraped over too much bread. And he said, because of that, he said, I need a holiday, a very, very long holiday. I don't know if there's many people who probably don't look at that and think, I know exactly how Bilbo feels. We feel stretched, sort of like butter scraped over too much bread. We are going to be stretched constantly in this life, which is why it's so important for us to rely on each other, to be there for one another, to look to the Lord in all things. Which brings me to one other quote I have on my desk, and that is, every time I get lost or I don't know what to do in this crazy season of life, God tells me the way forward is through humility. The way forward is through humility. And so that's been helpful for me to have these things written out. I counsel people to do that all the time, to put these on your mirror in your bathroom, to have them somewhere in your car, refrigerator, on your, magnet on your refrigerator, wherever, to remind yourself of these things, because it does help. And the Proverbs, I love this one. A wise person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simple go blindly on and suffer the consequences. So we don't need to have, paralysis by analysis, but we also don't need people to go just jump in really quickly. We need to think about things and ask and pray about this. God, do you want me to be doing this? Is this wise? Give me counsel here. The Bible says if we pray for wisdom, God will give it to us. The other proverb I have is that even fools are thought wise when they keep silent with their mouths shut. They seem intelligent. Boy, isn't that a good one? And I remember seeing this years ago, and I remember I heard this before, and I couldn't remember who it was, and I had to look it up, but Abraham Lincoln had this also. It says, better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak out and remove all doubt. So I believe that if you are debating about whether you should say something or not, and many times it's just to remain silent. Sometimes no comment is the best way forward. Another one I have up there is that, Lord, help me to choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong. Boy, isn't this something for our times? When you have these decisions before you, which are nearly every day, it is always going to sometimes be easier to choose something that's wrong rather than to do what's right, but actually it's harder. So again, thinking about the Proverbs there, about thinking about what you're doing and the consequences it's going to have, it's the same thing with this, is to do what is right even though it may be harder instead of choosing the easier wrong. A couple more things, and I'm going to come to a close. But one is I'm going to put this quote up here. It may not make sense until I explain it, but the question for all questions as I prepare to preach, will what I say help Willard Keynes pump gas on Monday morning? Now, you may be thinking, what is he talking about here? Maybe 8 years ago, Joe Fraser, Alice Fraser, gave me a book by a pastor in Atlanta. He had died many, many years ago, named Frank Harrington. He was over Peachtree Presbyterian Church for maybe 3 decades, and they did a dedication of a book to him shortly after he died, and I worked through it and looked at it, and inside the book they were telling a story about when Frank was first preaching, and his sermons were absolutely theologically accurate. They were theologically right. He would never get in trouble with anything he was saying, but as many people in the congregation would say, he was boring people to death. So Tim Keller's wife said to me on one occasion when she was down at a preaching lab one time, "Jonathan, everything you said was technically sound and theologically right. It will be utterly forgotten by the time people get in their cars to drive away after church." And this is what happened with Frank Harrington, and that they communicated to him, and they looked across the road. It was Joe Fraser's, I guess his grandfather, was meeting with Frank Harrington over breakfast. And he said, "Frank, look, I'm going to say this to you one time. You see that gas station across the road? That is owned by a guy named Willard Keynes, who comes to this church every single Sunday. And he sits up here in the front row. You need to craft your messages in such a way where you connect the scripture that we learn and hear and connect with the heart, where you can help him pump gas as a Christian better on Monday." And that stuck with me when I read that, because I realized I've got to communicate and to have some connective tissue between what we read in the Word of God and to connect it with our lives. Because it really doesn't amount to a hill of beans if no one can connect the two. It's just nothing but theological truths that people don't understand. So I worked very, very, very hard to try to connect those two, where you leave here saying, okay, that makes sense. I see how the gospel can inform and impact my life. Lastly, I'll just put up here, I've talked about earlier, a lot of people have asked me about these pictures at the top of my desk there, the very, very top. Those are 4 pictures that were taken from our balcony at our house in Boone, where we lived for some time. And they represent each one of the seasons. There is over there on the far left that is the summer, when the summer rains were about to come in, and then you see that pink sky there was, I believe that was in the spring. I might have the two mixed around. And then you have the fall picture. Obviously the leaves are changing, and you see there right in front of us, that was actually a horse farm right over there. That winter picture. Never got tired of the seasons. Loved every bit of it. Which brings in this last picture I have on my desk, and it was a saying by Ernest Hemingway after he died, still there in his community in Idaho. But it says this: "Best of all, he loved the fall. The leaves yellow on the cottonwoods, leaves floating on the trout streams, and above the hills, the high blue woodland skies. Now he will be a part of them forever." So I have that picture up in my office with that saying there, and that's a picture of me there on the New River there, right there in Blowing Rock. Actually, that's in Boone, over in Valley Cruces, where that picture's taken, that we go to nearly every year. Very close to my heart. But anyway, I hope that you have seen enough today of my office, these pictures, the story of my life, sayings, to give an idea of a little bit about what my passions, what moves me, what I find encouraging. And so now when you come in, you can know what the story is behind each of these things. I only got about half of it, so maybe another time I'll do another Ponderings and cover the other half. But anyway, thank you for tuning in. Love you guys. I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, and God bless.